much as your movies take it, you know it was fun.
Good evening, all, and welcome to episode 88 of Double Feature Horror Show. We are closing in on episode 100. It is definitely on the horizon. I'll give people a minute to come back in. I know how it goes on YouTube. You're waiting for everything to start and you need to refresh. It's a little bit of a hullabaloo every Thursday. And, oh, hello, friendly people tonight. Hello, Mergoot. Hello, Mima. Good to see you. Hello, Victoria again. Hello, Slim. Joe was sharing interpretations earlier. I love this. Every time I do a Lynch stream, we get a lot of opinions going around. And also friend of the channel, Shrouded Hand. Good to see you, man. And oh dear. We ban you from Lynch streams, Harry, and we ban you. And there's a good reason we ban you from David Lynch discussions.
Our old friend Harry, and how are you doing, sir?
He's a Lotus Eater appreciator. So
no, he's not an appreciator of the master, Lynch. But
no.
I'll give him for that. He seems like a very nice guy otherwise.
He's a fabulous guy. He's excellent. And he chronicles the clown decade with the kind of iron stomach that you develop after a few years of doing it.
Oh, very much so. I don't feel anything anymore.
We're all numb to it, aren't we? So thank you very much, Harry, and I appreciate it. David Lynch, I'm going to redacted you in real life. No, in real life. Fantastic stuff, fantastic. And former co-host, unfortunately not always available, but we get him in for special occasions. And our other co-host, that crime guy you're in the chat. Good to see you, man. Good to see you. Yeah. Sad you can't be with us this week, but really nice to see you in the chat. However, we'll not tarry further because we do have on the panel Waifu extending her stay from Women's Month.
Good evening. I have been let out of the wife closet. I don't know where I was going with that. There's probably some kind of... I've distracted myself now. I've just spent a few minutes... Sorry?
Our first impressions.
I'm doing well. I've been looking up details about the actor. Someone just mentioned in the comments about the actor who was accused of murdering his ex-wife. So clearly that's in the brain, hence wife closet. I'll shut up now.
It's too late. Wife closet is now in the deep lore. We expect wife closet fan art.
Oh no.
Harry, rescue us from that weird self-report. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing fine, thank you very much. I've had a good day at work where all I did was read a comic book in preparation for something I'm doing with Connor tomorrow, so watch out for that when it eventually comes out. And other than that, I've just had a nice relaxing evening, fit in a very, very quick gym session, and I've been looking forward very much to talk about this, Lost Highway, one of my absolute favourite films of all time. So thank you very much for having me on.
Oh, that is fantastically moral. Yeah, we've been chatting a while since I saw you defending this film.
I thought he will not be named again.
Yes. Yeah, it's Lynch is a divisive guy, and when I saw you standing up for him, I thought, okay, we got to have a conversation.
Yes, Lynch is my favourite filmmaker. I don't think that's an exaggeration to say. There are some that I do also really like Robert Eggers, but I think a lot of the filmmakers that I appreciate, I think you'll probably like as well, that unlike many, I am actually quite a fan of Ari Aster's two films, even if I know a lot of people really don't like the second one, which name suddenly eludes me.
Would that be Midsommar?
Yes, Midsommar. People really don't like that one. I don't like it as much as Hereditary, but I don't think it's anywhere near as bad as people say. But I think a lot of my favourite filmmakers tend to operate under a very methodical, very distinct, and very atmospheric style, which is what I appreciate in my horror films. I can appreciate a good popcorn horror. Like recently, I went through the first two Insidious films for the first time ever. Didn't find them scary in the slightest, but I thought they were a good time. But if I actually want to feel something other than mild amusement, I'll pop on one of those guys' films.
So, I mean, whenever we have someone on for the first time, I always like to ask them the kind of horror they're into. So given that, do you find yourself appreciating, say, sort of Korean and Japanese horror a bit? Have you gone in that direction?
I have not delved over in that direction, sadly. The only Korean film that I can remember watching is Old Boy, which is certainly not a horror. And other than that, I have watched the American remake of The Ring on behalf of my missus, which had one decent moment where they open the closet and the guy's face is all messed up. But other than that was not really scary to me, and the characters were incredibly frustrating the whole way through. I can't remember much, but I can remember that.
Okay, but otherwise, the kind of horror you're going for, it's say slow burn, tense, challenging, not popcorn horror.
Not popcorn horror, no. Like I said, the other one that I like that's kind of similar to Lynch's style would be Possession, which you covered last week. I've only seen it once, but that left a certain impression of me. And I'm glad that I could be here on this, the second part of what I can only assume is the cornucopia of cuckoldry films.
Yeah, it's a bit of a recurring theme, eh? You know,
Certainly
in
is.
Lynch.
This one.
Maybe, I don't know if we want to look close into that or not. Maybe that's your interpretation. I'm looking forward to finding out. But
I'm looking forward to hearing your interpretation as well. I'll let you go into it before we get further.
Okay. I mean, just sticking on it a little bit longer. Would you say, just out of interest, what's been a horror experience? Has there been a horror that's absolutely you wanted to throw your laptop against the wall? Have you some recent horror? Yeah, in a bad way, like in a trend in horror you haven't appreciated, just out of interest.
I really can't remember. I'm certain that there have been a number of horror films that I've fallen asleep during. Much to my shame, the first Halloween is one of them. But I was very tired, and we just finished having a party, so I was not in the state to watch that anyway. And oh, sorry.
No, forgivable. I interrupted you. Apologies.
The other one is another Carpenter film as well, The Fog. I fell asleep during that one, and I wasn't even under the influence of anything. I just found that one very boring, to be honest.
Oh, fair play. Mergoot's come in with actually a fantastic question. Opinions on Cronenberg?
The only Cronenberg film that I have seen is Videodrome, which I thought was very intriguing, did have a good atmosphere. There was some imagery in it that I really did like. There was the part relatively early on in the film, if I think back to it, where he's watching the television and it jump cuts to the image of him and is it Debbie Harry in that large red room? I found that to be very striking imagery that stuck with me.
Oh. Yeah.
Well, isn't that one also about being cooked? Or am I misremembering?
There is a little bit like that. Like he's trying to get with Debbie Harry, and she's just feeling the pull of Videodrome in a very sensual way. Like she does need satisfaction from another source.
I remember.
So, yeah, you could say that.
I remember being shocked in that film mainly by just how far Debbie Harry goes in some places with the role, because being that she was mainly a pop singer as far as I was aware before then, it was shocking that she went as far as she did in some scenes in that film.
Yeah, it's a weird little thing, but Debbie Harry has done an unexpectedly good sideline in horror. So Videodrome, she had a little role in John Carpenter's Body Bags as a saucy nurse, very unexpected. And the one I really love her for is Tales from the Dark Side, the movie, which I know there are going to be people in chat just saying, yes, review it. We will get around to it eventually, guys. It's a cult favorite.
I'll have to find those and check them out because I've not watched either of those.
Oh, yeah, they're lovely. I mean, in fairness, Harry, they're a lot lighter than the kind of stuff. They're a bit more popcorn, but I also have a complete bias towards anthology movies. I'm far too generous to them when I assess them, if I'm honest.
There's one, actually. If you want a horror film that made me want to throw something in a bad way, you mentioned anthology. I remember a few years ago I was at a friend's flat and they put on, was it VHS, the anthology film, where it's a bunch of separate horror stories all from found footage perspective. That was blooming awful.
Yeah. I nodded my head then. I tried. I did not like VHS. I found it very incoherent. I found the stories unengaging, except for Siren, the first one. I mean, I think they knew that was the best segment.
Well, you always got to start off strong.
Yeah. I wasn't a fan of VHS. In fairness, I haven't seen anything else from the franchise just because of how little I liked the first one. I gave it 2 goes as well, but
yeah, it didn't make me want to come back for more. And the CGI was laughable. You're on that smaller budget, don't try CGI.
100%, 100%. All right, well, I'll go into the topic in just a section, but it's traditional at this point. Harry, is there anything you would like to shill?
Of course. Well, you can find me on Lotus Eaters. If anybody is watching who is unaware of who I am a podcast co-host on the Lotus Eaters website, lotuseaters.com. We produce loads of premium content, and if you want a premium membership, you can go as low as £5 per month. And I've got some really good stuff on there. Recently, just yesterday, in fact, a new article came out that I had written ages ago at this point. It took ages to come out, about the dichotomy of individualism and collectivism, and why I don't think it's good to, or useful in any sense, or even accurate to reality, to separate people's ideology between those who consider themselves individual and those who consider themselves collectivist, because realistically speaking, no one is entirely one or the other, and it's silly and larpy to try and pretend that you are. That one's got an interesting and spicy reaction so far from a lot of people who are just throwing 1980s Cold War talking points about individualism at me. So that's been that's been fun. But we produce loads on there, so please check it out.
All right, fantastic. I mean, I'm sure people will be familiar, but it's, we got to shill. As for me own shills, well, waifu, anything just out of interest?
Nothing for me. I would say, as TCG can't be here today, I will shill on his behalf and encourage anyone watching the stream to go and check out TCG, the usual co-host's channel, because it's excellent true crime stuff. And I've been quiet for the last few minutes because I've been going down a fascinating rabbit hole about the true crime links to, I forgot the name of the film we're talking about, Lost Highway. There's a lot. So I will happily take us on a detour there. But yeah, I just wanted to shill TCG. So go and check out That Crime Guy.
Fantastic idea. And if you want to see one of his true crime things, watch his Lululemon case. I watched that one last. I thought that had some really unexpected and quite grim twists delivered in a sensitive way. So that was really good. And if you want just a bit of fun, his community quiz, the last one where our friend Shrouded Hand here was on with Disturban. I was on as well, helping our team to lose, but let's ignore that. That's a good laugh if you want something a bit more lighthearted. And all right, I'll shill for myself here. Well, you're already on the channel, so thank you for that. And if you haven't subscribed already, please do subscribe. Please do be, how should we do it this week? What do you reckon? Get that like button and just absolutely
couch.
Yeah, drag that like button onto the casting couch. Smash that subscribe button into the glass table.
Oh, no. Oh.
You know what to do, folks. If you are looking for something else to watch, I did an interesting stream with Pharaoh on 12 Angry Men. That was last Sunday. That's something a bit off the usual beaten path. I also have my Get Out video, which I would like more people to watch. And that's pretty much it. If you want to support me, sorry, I messed that up. If you want to support me, super chats are open, and you can also join the channel as a member, either here or on Subscribestar. And if you do that, then I'm able to get you early access. I'm able to get you exclusive content, and I'm able to do my favorite thing, which is the Easter egg posts. Not that anything is hidden in my videos. This, obviously not. That's a rumor. I would never do that, Susan. Okay. So moving on to the topic. It's a quick one, folks. It's a nice quick topic. It's just helping you prepare for the upcoming December season. Oh, Joe, fantastic. Yes, that's what I should have done. I think that button was definitely smashed a few times over the course of the film.
Madam, family-friendly stream.
What? Anyway, So as requested, I'm starting to try and give people a bit of a preview, a bit of advance warning over what's coming up in the month ahead. So for December, our streams, the next one is going to be Violent Night. I couldn't resist it, guys. Watch the trailer. It's like Die Hard with a violent Santa. It looks mad. It's very popcorn, but it looks kind of fun. Sometimes we just need a fun one. Then the week after, we're doing Tales from the Crypt's Demon Night, which is somewhat schlocky, somewhat cheesy, and a little bit glorious. I know there are lots of fans of that around here. So that is a treat for you. And then a somewhat delayed Plan 9 from Outer Space. No comment. But you did request it.
I'm still so angry.
Yeah, waifu has not recovered yet. So you'll have a bit of advance warning. Those are the streams. Now, this one down here, the Craft Legacy, that is the subject of my next video. It's not a good film. I'm covering it in enough depth that you won't need to have seen it to appreciate it. But if you want to do your due diligence, you can watch The Craft Legacy. It is a short film. It is on Netflix. It is terrible. And then the only other thing is the Christmas special, which I'm keeping a secret. But it is not a great work of art that I would spoil for you if you hadn't seen it in advance. In the grand Christmas tradition, I'm just going to be dunking on something that truly, truly deserves it. So I'll keep that as a nice surprise for you, but that will be dropping before Christmas, probably in Christmas week. That is about everything. And that's the short topic section. I'm keeping it super short. Oh, one other thing. If I can schedule it, we're just going to have a sort of one short fun night, just doing some of the games that you've seen before that you guys enjoyed. And I'll try and get as many people on. You can drop in, drop out, just play a few rounds of the game. So the horror film quiz, play your stars right, a couple of other ideas I had. So we'll give that a go, and we'll just do that as a short fun stream closer to Christmas itself. That is about everything I've got to say on that for this topic. And we can now go into discussing Lost Highway. I nearly clicked Leave Studio. Oh no.
It's not that bad.
Oh dear, shocking stuff. All right,
You're
lovely.
going to leave and then drop Harry in. Super secret surprise.
Oh, absolutely tag teamed. Oh no. Okay, here we go. There is Lost Highway, and I'm just going to expand that a bit so it takes up the right amount of room. Okay, while I'm doing that, this is an interesting one. I'm going to give the full spoiler warning. We're spoiling the whole film. We're going in full depth. But I did wonder, would we necessarily be spoiling it? Because I kind of feel like a Lynch film is something that it's not so much about a plot and its revelations.
I don't think that you can really spoil the feeling of watching a Lynch film. They're very unique, and the reaction that you'll get will be very unique to you. So just saying from A to B, here's what happens in the narrative, will not give you an indication of what the film is like at all, really, other than, yes, they are very confusing.
Mm. In a way, I think a lot of people like to go into a Lynch film with almost some support to watch it, with a bit of a guide to how to interpret it. So they're not completely lost.
Yeah, I would say that this is a film that you can't really do that with, because unlike Mulholland Drive, which you covered last time, this one has not been analysed to death. People haven't done, as far as I've found online at least, people haven't done multi-hour breakdowns of what the plot actually means or what actually happens in the narrative. So it's inevitable when you go into this film, you're this is where the training wheels come off. If you're watching Lynch, a lot of people will start like I did with Blue Velvet, maybe delve into Twin Peaks, and then go to Mulholland Drive because they know that's one of the most famous ones, even if it is a bit confusing. But then you can just refer online to any little thing that will tell you what it actually means. This one, not so much.
Yeah, I'd go with that. I do find that Lost Highway is quite glossed over.
Sadly, because I do think it's possibly my favourite Lynch film, and I don't know exactly why. Mainly just because when I watch it, it gets a very visceral reaction out of me. There's the opening, 40 minutes, the first third. It's very uneasy, full of tension. The middle bit is kind of a bit of a layoff of the tension. It kind of takes its foot off the pedals for a second and lets you take a breather. And then the last third or so, certainly on Sunday when I rewatched it, which must have been my 5th rewatch, I would say, it made me. I've watched this film quite a few times. It's one of my favourites to show friends when we're all hanging out, to really weird them out and freak them out. I'm a bit mean like that. But no, watching it for this time on Sunday, getting to that third act, particularly the glass table that you mentioned, it made me feel physically nauseous, parts of it, because the atmosphere was so thick. It starts to go at a breakneck pace. You don't understand what's going on, and the whole time, all you can really understand is something is wrong here.
Definitely. So I'll just say, okay, Shrouded, that's cool, man. Also, that goes for anyone. If you want to experience Lost Highway completely fresh, go in with no preconceptions. Totally cool. Come back on the rewatch and just see what you thought of it, see how you felt about it, and then see what Harry and I say. I actually don't know Harry's take on this, so I am intrigued.
I don't really know many people's take on this. Also, if you do go and watch this and come back to the stream later, have fun? ? Maybe. I don't know if that applies here, but enjoy yourself, maybe. No,
to bring just to bring waifu in. How did you feel going into it? What were your expectations going in, waifu?
So I'm not a huge Lynch fan. I love Mulholland Drive. I find bits of it like the sort of random. Sorry, Chloe, the singing bit gets me irritated. So I tend to find. Sorry, I mean it's very passionate.
It's cool. It's cool.
It's fine.
I know. I think the thing for me is that I often find with Lynch films there'll be moments where he'll deliberately insert strangeness into the film that kind of tell you almost that it's not quite real, or it's not real in the way you think it is. And I often find that quite frustrating. Sort of like I was saying with Possession last week, it sort of takes you out of the film, takes you out of the emotional realism, and that grates on me sometimes. But I found this one, so I was sort of expecting a bit of that. I was a bit kind of like, blooming heck, it's over 2 hours long, what are we doing? So my expectations weren't hugely high, but I found it incredibly gripping. I didn't find, even though there was the sort of usual Lynchian weirdness and the kind of moments where you're like, wait, what's going on? I actually found it incredibly powerful. I loved the kind of, I'm a sucker for a whodunit and I'm a sucker for a crime mystery. So I kind of liked that element of it. That got me. And then the stuff for me that made it really kind of hit, so I really enjoyed it in the end, and sort of against my expectations, were the kind of, the stuff that had the really queasy Me Too echoes. This I should imagine it was sort of queasy at the time it came out anyway, and then it's just become even more like nasty and visceral with the kind of final revelations of the open secret that everyone knew and didn't say kind of thing. It was just like, oh, was Lynch making a point here that no one paid attention to? I don't know. So I just found all of that just kind of created this really compelling, really enjoyable film that actually held my attention in a way that I wasn't sort of expecting to for a Lynch film.
Nice. Yeah. I'll just put in my own perspective. I've seen a fair amount of Lynch, not everything. We tried Twin Peaks recently and I could not get into it.
Disappointment.
We watched about 7 episodes, but it was just too much. It was too obvious he was just messing with us.
I disagree. Twin Peaks.
Okay.
Twin Peaks is my favorite show, and I don't want to turn it into a debate on Twin Peaks, especially if you've not watched all of it. But I would say a lot of it is a lot of the messing with it stuff is I find that very fun, and I find the characters compelling and quirky and three-dimensional in many cases. And I also find the central mystery compelling, even past the point where you know who did it, so to speak. But it's not going to work for everyone.
Yeah, I've said a lot of times that I'm absolutely fine with things that they're not standard visions, and even if it's the point that they will alienate 95% of an audience, as in they just can't watch it. If there's 5% for whom that is the 10 out of 10 rewatch a few times a year movie, I'm cool with that, and I just want everyone to have a few of those each. So I can understand why Twin Peaks has a very intense fan base, because it's a very intense, unusual vision.
I think it's also important to remember with Twin Peaks, certainly for the first 2 series, that it was a much more collaborative project than we typically get from Lynch as well. So there will be episodes that aren't written by him and aren't written by Mark Frost, the co-creator of it as well, that may not entirely carry over the tone from episode to episode. And that's something that gets, to be fair, it does get really bad in the second half of the season 2 when Lynch really just was upset with the studio, said, screw this, I'm going to go make Wild at Heart instead, and went and did that. And the show kind of lost its way for a bit. So it's much more collaborative, but then you get stuff like the 3rd series, which is just him and Frost going completely crazy. You get 18 episodes of pure Lynch madness, and I absolutely love it.
Fair. All right, well, let's lay a bit of the groundwork. So this is coming out in 1997. This is a chance this is Lynch getting his hand on a bit more money for the production. You've got bigger names, bigger connections. His reputation has grown since Blue Velvet was released in, I don't know, when was that?
86, I think.
86?
I'll just give it a quick Google.
Give it a quick Google. And in many ways, Blue Velvet has...
Yes, 86.
Wonderful. It's got quite a few ramifications on this film. It's, how can I say... As with Lynch, there are so many ways you can go into this, but trying to go from the production side, Blue Velvet was incredibly controversial. In cinematic terms, stick with me on this one. In cinematic terms, it was quite uncompromising. There was extreme content that was very difficult and is still very difficult to watch, especially in terms of sexual violence, sexual predation, menacing behavior, and madness.
I will still never forget the first time I watched that film and Frank just explodes into the scene.
Oh,
he's such an unknown quantity in the film who feels so out of place for what you think has been set up for the first 45 minutes of that film. He's also the only character that swears as well, which really sets him apart from everyone else.
He makes up for everyone else.
I've never noticed that before.
Yeah. But another aspect of Blue Velvet is, in another way, it's quite, how can I say, it is compromised in the sense of Lynch goes out of his way to help the audience understand. He's very moderating in Blue Velvet. And what I mean for that is there's a few key moments. The most obvious one is, is it Patricia Arquette again?
No, she's not in that film.
Darn it. What's her name?
Are you on about Laura Dern?
Laura Dern, thank you so much. Laura Dern talks about a dream she had and effectively spells it out for you. There is a bird and it was representing this, etc. So that when the bird is seen at the end, you've been clued in.
Yes.
So in a way, Lynch is really helping you with that film. He's really helping you on that. Lost Highway, I would say he's still doing it a little bit, but not as much. Would you go with that?
See, I would say that next to Inland Empire and possibly parts of Twin Peaks, this is his most difficult to follow film, certainly for me. I would say Inland Empire is just completely mental, and it was, cobbled together from a lot of improv, unscripted things he did with Laura Dern. So it's understandable that film would be relatively incomprehensible. But this one feels uncompromising with a purpose. And Blue Velvet, like you say, it gives the audience a helping hand. But I would say that Blue Velvet also has one big thing helping its comprehensibility, which is that character motivations and the plot itself that you're following is actually quite easy for a Lynch film. From point A to B, you understand why a character is doing what they're doing, what it is that they're aiming for. You understand that beyond any metaphorical aspect of it, it's basically Frank's bad. He's kidnapped this woman's family. He's forcing her to do horrible things on behalf of him. And Kyle MacLachlan's character ends up in the middle of that, and events unfold. Relatively easy. With this, point A to point B is very difficult to follow. It's difficult to understand why all of a sudden Fred's face is melting off in the middle of the film, and why he suddenly shows up again right before the end after a very passionate scene with Patricia Arquette. And I would say there are a few things that tip me off as to how you should understand the film, and the main one being, and I don't know if we want to jump ahead too far just yet. Should I say it? So that when
let's go for it. Let's just go for it.
All right.
Oh, actually, let's hold off just a tiny bit if we can. Do you want to just make a note of where you were going to go?
It's easy to remember, yeah.
And waifu, do you want to do the pint of Guinness challenge?
Oh, bloody hell.
Oh, dear.
Go on.
I'm not good at these. Okay.
Right.
So the film opens with an unhappily married couple who are feeling paranoid and put upon because someone is leaving threatening videotapes at their house, including one. So the videotapes are filming the outside of their house, and then they get one that's clearly been taken while they were asleep in their bed. So someone's breaking in. They call the police, who are relatively useless, but kind of say, oh, we'll come and, help out if you need us again, kind of thing. They go to a party where the husband, Fred, encounters a very sinister, creepy man who looks very much like your man who plays Dracula in the 1930s. Come on, Horrorshow.
Bela Lugosi, are you thinking
Thank
of?
you. Yeah, meets this mystery man who looks very much like a kind of stereotypical cartoon vampire, who says some vaguely incomprehensible, threatening things to him, says that he's currently in Fred's house while still talking to him at the party. It's all a bit unsettling, very Lynch, very creepy, very worrying. Next thing we know, they've got back home, they go to bed, and I can't quite remember how it happens, but basically, big surprise, your boy Fred has ended up being arrested for the savage and brutal murder of his wife, when he thought he was just calling the police to help because there'd been another intrusion. So all very kind of like, whoa, how did this happen? Creepy. I'm definitely going over my 3 minutes. He's in prison.
You've got about a minute.
Crap. He's in prison having a bad time. Suddenly there's some kind of weirdness happens, and he is transfigured into a much younger sort of teenager called Pete. And we follow Pete instead. And Pete is sort of released from prison because everyone's like, how the heck did you get in here? He goes back to his job at a garage and meets a beautiful woman who happens to look identical to the woman we've just seen murdered, except that she's now blonde. She's the girlfriend of a sinister, creepy, unpleasant, Weinstein-y gangster. But nothing daunted, your chap starts a torrid, steamy love affair with her, gets threatened by the gangster, and then he and the woman decide they're going to commit a massive theft and escape together, and sort of liberate themselves. That all goes horribly wrong. And then they sort of end up driving into the desert on a bit of a getaway and end up at this shack with the creepy mystery man from the beginning. And then Fred's back instead of Pete, and it's all very weird and Lynch. And it ends with him kind of driving down the highway, having some emotions. I've definitely given the Guinness too much head.
I'll rescue you for the moment. I know there's one more important detail to mention, but before that, I will just say thank you, Mr. Gently Benevolent. I Want to make sure I got that super chat in there. Thank you for the $5 Australian. How are the proper horror show and waifu plushies coming along? Oh dear. You know, since you've raised this, one of the favourite Spice Girls, Harry, are you aware of the nickname the Spice Girls?
I've never heard that before. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about it.
The idea of Carl as a manager and Jarl as his little boy band. You don't have to pass comment.
I will refrain.
But if you were to be in that situation and have a band name, what would your preference be? Would it be Swindon Club 7, Sargon Direction, Saving the Westlife?
You've just got all of these off the top of your head. Have you been in contact with Mr. Gently Benevolent, organising this, arranging it? I feel entrapped right now.
No worries. Thank you, Mr. GB, for harassing the guests.
Sargon 5, perhaps?
I like it, yes. Anyway, I imagine there was one thing that needs to be added to the Pint of Guinness summary. And by the way, folks, doing the Guinness summary is an absolute nightmare.
Particularly as someone in the chat just said that it only takes 119.5 seconds precisely to pour a Guinness. That may have been a joke, but I sort of hope it's real.
I would believe it. The video we have does speed it up a little bit, I think, and it's actually it should be about 2 minutes 20 in the video, but that's maybe a bit too much Guinness details. I'd say probably the most important thing is the exact start of it, which starts with some kind of frenzied footage speeding down the highway at night.
Oh, yes.
And it ends on the same footage. And the very first thing to happen is a man Fred is disturbed by someone ringing his intercom and announcing something.
Yeah, that's a fair point. To be fair, the edition of the film we were definitely not watching on some sort of illegal site anywhere. The sound mixing on it was so dire that I couldn't hear anything for the first 3 minutes. Which, to be honest, with the Lynch film, I thought was deliberate. So
I was going to say that might actually be deliberate because I own a Blu-ray copy of the film. I was lucky enough to track down a German one on eBay, and the first maybe 15 minutes, whatever happens before the saxophone solo, are nigh inaudible.
Yes, it's painful. Also, this film is really hard to find.
Yes, it is. That's one of the other reasons I think it might be just under-analysed compared to something like Blue Velvet or Twin Peaks or Mulholland Drive, because lots of people just haven't watched it.
I'll just take a moment just to say, hey, Devontae, good to see you, man. I haven't seen you for a few weeks, so good to see you. Thanks for dropping in. We're doing Lost Highway. It's full spoiler mode, but I don't think it will ruin the film. In fact, a lot of people like to go into this with... a little bit of a guide to what the heck's going on. Yes, so as we're saying, it is blooming hard to hear at the start, but yes, he gets a message from a mysterious person saying Dick Laurent is dead. And at the very end, he delivers that message to himself.
Yes, and you also get the sound of the police cars driving off at the beginning where Fred looks out the window and doesn't see anything, and then you understand that it's because he was being chased by the police at the end as well. Very interesting. But I've just thought of something. Sorry, don't want to derail, just something cheeky. Do you think that the reason that the audio at the beginning is so quiet might be so that people turn up the volume to hear it and then get scared by the saxophone solo?
I genuinely wondered. I had moments where I thought that the sound mixing people had woken up that day and chosen kind of just catastrophic violence.
They chose war.
Yes, they woke up and chose war.
Well,
and then bam, Rammstein.
David Lynch would totally do that. Like, something I don't think we talk about enough is the guy has a very sly sense of humor. So, and this is throughout, there's always a kind of wink to what he's doing where he knows he's being quite over the line. And there's really cute stuff in this that I adored. So we talked about the bit of the mystery of them receiving VHS tapes. Poor Zoomers quaking in fear.
Is this the first found footage horror film? Question.
Oh, nice.
Oh, Probably the old. And I won't get drawn into that. But yes, they have the they start receiving these tapes, which are recordings of inside and outside their house, and but what's her name? What's Patricia Arquette's name with Fred? Renee, thank you. I never remember character names. She describes her house as being near the observatory, which I thought was just hilarious in the context of someone is observing them. It's a lovely little thing. There's also another thing I'll mention now, nice and quick. This film may be tragically underanalyzed, partially because it's so darn hard to get a copy of legally. Obviously, we found a legal copy. We're dedicated. But it has been influential. Now, we're going to talk about Silent Hill 2 at some point, and Silent Hill 2 is massively influenced by Blue Velvet in some like incredible close parallels. But Silent Hill 2, without dropping spoilers, is also pretty darn influenced by Lost Highway. You have the character receiving a videotape with that he should not be able to get to. It's sort of an impossible videotape that has some deep significance for the mystery unfolding around him. And there's also Michel Haneke's early 2000s film Caché, or Hidden, which revolves entirely around a man receiving these VHS tapes of his house, inside his house, that should be impossible to make. Now, Lost Highway goes in some very different directions. The videotapes are a really minor part of it in the grand plot. Caché makes a whole thing out of it, but I think there's no way Haneke was not influenced by Lost Highway and decided to really explore that idea.
Yeah, if I can add to that, I would also say on the Silent Hill theme, I'm lucky enough to own a PlayStation 4 that still has the playable teaser for Silent Hills installed on it, so I go back to that every so often. And I can definitely draw some parallels between what appears to be a force within that game that is a malevolent force gripping men, causing them to kill their own wives and families and children, and the narrative of this film as well, which is we'll get into as we go along.
Yeah, well, I think we might be there. It's odd with a Lynch film, like we can give the
when the plot starts.
Yeah, we give the pint of Guinness summary, and it's like those things definitely occur in the film, probably. Some of them in dreams, maybe. Some of them in real life, in their house in Los Angeles. But it doesn't necessarily convey how you feel watching it or what you take from it at all. So perhaps now we should just go for it. Harry, would you like to give... If someone comes to you and says, Harry, I watched Lost Highway. What the heck went on? What was that about?
Interestingly enough, that scenario has happened to me at least twice. So I actually have a bit of a pre-rehearsed script for this in my own head, which is still developing because my knowledge and understanding of the film changes a little bit every single time that I watch it. And I feel like in the past 2 hours, I've actually formulated something that might explain the end of the film for myself, at least my interpretation. So the way I see the film is kind of and you guys will probably differ with me on this. I see this as an examination of male insecurity, and is possibly why I prefer this one to Mulholland Drive, because Mulholland Drive is from the perspective of female characters and women's fears, even though it's written and directed by a man. I would say it's got a very feminine aspect to it, whereas this one is very masculine, because the entirety of the film is, whether you're watching Fred himself or not, the entirety of the film is from Fred's very warped perspective on reality and his understanding of his relationship with his wife, his wants and desires as a man, and the way that he tries to escape the consequences for his own actions. Now, I believe in this film that what we are actually seeing, what's portrayed on screen, is basically Fred's warped, in a similar way to Mulholland Drive, and I see this film in many ways as to be a little bit of blueprint to Mulholland Drive's narrative structure. Or perhaps David Lynch, because Mulholland Drive was kind of improv'd on the second half, at least, because it was supposed to be the TV pilot. Perhaps he might have just gone, right, okay, I did this with Lost Highway already. I'll move over to this. Because I try and view this film with a blanker slate as possible, but I do know that Lynch himself has described it as a psychogenic fugue. That's what he described it as in the pre-release to the film. So what we're seeing is Fred's warped and idealistic compartmentalization of what he did in murdering his own wife due to his fears of her infidelity, which may or may not have been accurate. He might have been right that she was cheating on him. He might have been wrong that she was cheating on him. Doesn't really matter, because everything that we're seeing is his understanding and his coping with what happened. So the thing that really tips me off to this is the line. Well, there's two scenes, and they're very early in the film, and I think they're pivotal, and they're both, well, one of them is one of the greatest demonstrations of male insecurity towards sex I've ever seen in my entire life. The first scene, which is important to understanding the film and cracking the code as I see it, is the one where the police are looking around the house after they receive the second videotape, and they understand that somebody has gotten into their house, and they say to Fred, have you got any video cameras? And he says, no. Why not? Because I don't. Oh, Fred doesn't like video cameras, and they ask him why, and he says, "I don't like." What is it? He says. He goes,
"I like to see things how I remember them."
Yes, not necessarily how they happened.
Yeah, we noted that line down as well, and we thought that is David Lynch talking directly to the audience, being like, "Okay, guys, yeah, got it."
I think part of this film is a little bit semi-autobiographical, because apparently that's something Lynch himself also stands by. He tends to stand by that, and also the scene from the beginning where Dick Laurent is dead. Supposedly that actually happened to him. So he woke up one day. Some guy rang the buzzer, said Dick Laurent is dead, and he looked out the window and no one was there. And it's interesting to note as well that the house that this film takes place in was David Lynch's house, and I think he designed it himself, which is why the house is so creepy.
I did not know that. That is an extra angle. Interesting.
Well, I think only David Lynch would design a house that's so claustrophobic. And the other
he does absolutely try and shy away from. Well, he avoids giving people the objective answer. He's always getting asked, what's happening? What's actually happening in the movie? And he just never gives an answer. So I think that is also his personality, his preference, as you say. He does want people to have a subjective understanding.
I like his attitude for it as well, which seems to just be, well, if I was writing a mystery film, why would I just reveal what the mystery was about in the interviews? That would be silly of me. What's the point of making it a mystery? But the other scene I think is important to understanding what's going on is the very early sex scene in the film, where Renee and Fred have the most awkward, dispassionate, unfulfilling sex you've ever seen portrayed in a film, where he seems to prematurely finish, so to speak. It's the most, especially given that this is immediately after, in the sequence of events that we see, he has done the gig, he's done his saxophone solo, he tries to ring home to see if she's there, and this is after one of the early scenes where she explains, oh, I'm not going to be there, I'm just going to stay home tonight, I'm just not feeling it. So he rings home to check if she's there, and she's not at home. So he's immediately on the back foot thinking, okay, where is she, what's she doing? And then he thinks back and seems to, this may or may not have happened, but he seems to remember seeing her walking through the crowd to the exit with a man that we later find out is called Andy. And so he's already in an incredibly emotionally vulnerable state. I think it's shown that she's quite submissive to him throughout the early parts of the film. He always seems to be domineering in some way, in quite a pathetic and insecure way, to be perfectly honest. He seems like quite a lowly status man, despite all of his success that he obviously has with this house in the Hollywood Hills and his saxophone career. But he's very domineering, he's very insecure. And then they have this sex where he just finishes way too early. And there is a close-up shot of the most devastating thing that one man could ever experience, which is her softly patting him on the back.
Mm.
Hear her coo in his ear, there, it's all right. Which is a complete ego destruction. Everything that he wants to be is destroyed in that one moment. He's not a good lover. He's not a good husband. He's being cheated on. Everything that props up his own sense of masculinity is just completely demolished in that moment, which is why immediately after, when he rolls over in the bed, he ends up turning around, at which point he sees the mystery man. And I believe the mystery man to be some kind of sort of escape mechanism for Fred to to sort of separate himself from his own actions. The mystery man represents the kind of evil, malevolent force that can build in a man that can cause him to do something like murder his own wife. So that's why he's the cameraman. God, that image.
Gotta love it.
Yeah.
What a face.
He's the cameraman. He's separating himself from it. It wasn't me stalking the house at night, staring at my wife while she's sleeping, thinking about murdering her. It was the cameraman. It was the mystery man who came up to me. That's why he says, I was already I'm already at your house. You invited me there, because he did, through his insecurities, through his failures as a man, to provide a loving relationship, to provide for himself. In getting cheated on, he is inviting that hatred inside of him. And everything else after the fact of him murdering his own wife, which we see about 40 minutes in, on the last videotape that Fred receives, which you'll notice is the only one he doesn't watch with Renee because he's already killed her at that point. Everything after that is basically a psychological cope for him trying to deny that he had any involvement with it. He becomes Pete for a while, which is the psychogenic fugue aspect, where he separates himself. Suddenly, instead of this pathetic man, he's got two girls on the go at the same time. The Renee stand-in, Alice, is actively cheating on somebody else with him. So he's suddenly the set object of sexual desire. He's the one in control. And it all, but the reality of the situation, his own insecurities end up seeping back in through characters like Mr. Eddie. And I think my final understanding of the film is that last third is basically a complete denial of what he'd done, where he still separates himself. He still can't accept what he'd done. And that last moment of the film is basically him flying in the electric chair while still trying to escape responsibility for his actions.
Yeah.
That's my understanding of the film.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, chat is agreeing. I think there's a mild disagreement over whether he could perform at all or whether he just performed concisely.
Yeah, that's fair.
That's a euphemism, but I was going to say, yeah, I got that shot. This will be the thing that throws people off. And what's a good way of saying this? You can go through an audience can be very confused by this. Why the heck is the protagonist completely changed? How did that happen? And he goes on the run. How the heck did that happen? Lynch kind of gives you, I think, an explanation very close to that, which is effectively it's a tale of a man who did kill his wife. He can't face it. So he has a basic escapist fantasy. And in the end, it's the very last moments where he's just freaking out, running away from the police as he would want to. Here we go. And for no reason, he's suddenly jerking his head. The lights are flashing in an impossible way. There's smoke coming up behind him.
His face is melting.
Yep. That is him being electrocuted. So he is in complete denial of reality, but nevertheless, reality catches up to him in that final moment. So there is a sort of very tethered to reality explanation that you can give to people and say, okay, that's lovely. That should be satisfying. That is what physically happened in the world over the course of the story. But it's the sub details within there that are a lot more interesting and a lot more revealing, as you said, because the explanation for these videotapes are far more interesting than someone snuck in or he sleepwalked and did it. They represent something quite interesting.
Before we get too deep into the interpretation, because I might jump off in a bit, someone in the comments is suggesting, and I can't tell if they're trolling, that apparently Lynch has confirmed this is a trans allegory, which
Bollocks.
might be a
I'm
red
gonna-
flag for you.
I would say possible. I'm going to doubt that mostly because Lynch wouldn't really confirm that. So
He would
Lynch
never
doesn't
do
confirm
anything.
meanings.
I'd love to see a trans story where he also transitions into the same sex he already was.
But I thought I'd quickly, if I do the kind of true crime elements that almost kind of ground the film in a bit too much reality,
Let's
and
go
then
for
I'll
that.
love y'all and leave you because I am shattered. But it's kind of a can of worms with this. So there's the kind of obvious, which is Robert Blake, who plays the mystery man, who shortly after, so about 4 years after this, Robert Blake's ex-wife was shot to death while waiting in her car following a dinner with him at a restaurant. He denied any responsibility for the crime because his defense was that he couldn't have personally shot her, as he'd gone back inside the restaurant to retrieve a pistol he'd left behind, which is a very brave alibi. But he then was put on trial and acquitted of the murder. But he kept a very low profile kind of afterwards. So he wasn't actually convicted, but her family then took him to the civil court, and similarly to O.J. Simpson, he was found guilty in the civil court or found responsible in the civil courts for her murder, even if he was acquitted in the criminal courts. So there's that. There's also obviously the shadow of the O.J. Simpson trial, because Lynch was apparently obsessed with that trial and with that whole situation in the writing of the film. There's that sort of aspect of denial, I think, is a really important part there, because it's that kind of the contrast perhaps to OJ, who was definitely acquitted. We can say he was acquitted. But it's that kind of, in his own words, if I did it element. But alongside that, there's also, can you still hear me, by the way? Because my headphones have suddenly just beeped.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Excellent. I heard an ominous electric beeping. So alongside Blake, also the policeman, the fat policeman, the really chubby one, is played by a chap called Louis Eppolito, who was an actual cop. He was a long-time police officer in the NYPD, alongside his partner Stephen Caracappa. And 9 years after appearing in Lost Highway, he was convicted for numerous grave criminal acts, including at least 5 high-profile murders for hire committed on behalf of the Gambino crime family throughout the 80s and 90s.
Goodness me.
Yeah. And it's kind of interesting. He had a sort of side hustle in film, and he always played either mafioso or mafiosi, there we go, or policeman, which I feel like is possibly, again, a bit too on the nose.
Look, this is that harmful stereotypes in effect, you know. This is, it was stigma that did it.
Exactly. There's obviously the kind of creepy thing I touched on earlier briefly about the kind of the queasy parallels with the kind of Me Too stuff, which is an interesting point as well, given that kind of slight undertones of Me Too. Patricia Arquette's sister Rosanna was actually one of the first victims to speak out against Weinstein. So that's kind of poignant. And there's obviously the link that at the end of the film you see Marilyn Manson and Twiggy Ramirez, who I don't think anything's come to court, so there's no kind of confirmed details either way, but both of them have been accused of various acts of, let's put it politely, sexual misconduct. So that's, again, a kind of interesting parallel. But the other 2 bits I wanted to point out, which again, like, it's just got, 3 bits. So many layers in this. The really sweet girlfriend, whose name I can now not remember, Sheila, I think she is. Pete's girlfriend in the car. It's played by a woman called Natasha Gregson Wagner. And she's the daughter of Natalie Wood, who was murdered, but it's never really been confirmed whether or not... Well, it's an unsolved murder.
Maybe a murder, maybe a very unfortunate drunken accident, but doesn't
either
look
way.
good.
Yeah. And then there's obviously Massey. Was it Michael Massey?
Michael Massey, yeah.
Yeah, who is unfortunately fired the bullet that killed Brandon Lee during the filming of The Crow in 1993. So that's another kind of uncanny link. But the most kind of tragic thing, and I think one that most directly affected Lynch, is the unsolved murder of Jack Nance that happened in the months between the film's production and its release. So Jack Nance was the lead in Eraserhead, and his career never really took off. Lynch loved working with him and kind of kept working with him on and off for most things he could get him in.
From what I'm aware, he was such good friends with him that he ended up casting him in the first 2 seasons of Twin Peaks. But one of the reasons he cast him in so much stuff was apparently it allowed him to keep his membership of the Actors Union and get the free and get the healthcare benefits from it.
Oh, right.
Which would be a very nice. If that is true, that's a really lovely thing to do for a friend.
Yeah,
That is really decent.
To add some extra to that, Eraserhead was the first one they did. Absolute, like shoestring budget. Done on weekends over about 2 years. And so Jack Nance, for all this time, he's not really making any money off David Lynch here, but he's just coming back to his friend's weird converted apartment or converted garage, shooting a couple of film scenes and then going away. And he's just doing that for 2 years and not really getting any reward for it. And luckily, Eraserhead became a cult success. And I think David Lynch has always been very loyal ever since that.
Yeah, I wasn't aware that Nance's death was considered an unsolved murder. From what I was aware, because when he died, he was still in either his mid to late 50s, but he looked a lot older than that. It was because he was a lifelong alcoholic and who was still struggling up in the late 90s before he died. So I always heard that it was just that a bunch of friends had seen him and he'd passed out earlier on in that day and smacked his head and probably given himself a concussion. And he was in a state of distress and a little bit sort of woozy, but they thought he would be okay. And I just heard that he had sort of like a brain hemorrhage or fell back over and knocked his head and died again. I didn't know it was unsolved murder territory.
Yeah, so it was. He was an alcoholic. He was a very heavy drinker. There's a really tragic thing about the death of his second wife, which is a bit of a detour, but on the November the 17th of I want to say 1997, Jack Nance got into a sort of argument with a group of young men out in front of a Winchell's Donuts store in Los Angeles, and they got into quite a heated argument. It's quite uncertain what happened. It's kind of, did he initiate it? Did they hassle him for no reason? All that's known is that one of them hit him, and he hit his head when he fell to the ground. But because he was quite used to sort of hitting his head and bumping himself about a bit because of the alcoholism, he went home and slept it off. He woke up the next day with a black eye and a headache, but again, didn't think much of it. So didn't sort of go and get medical attention. And then he met some friends for lunch the sort of day after, and told them about the encounter on the previous day and was like, oh, I told some kid off. I guess I got what I deserved. And after saying goodbye to his friends, he went home and lay down again, only this time he didn't wake up. He died in his sleep at the age of 53 from a subdural hematoma caused by blunt force trauma to the head. The police investigation ruled his death a homicide, but no suspect was ever named, and to this day the case remains open. It's possible, even likely, that the person who dealt Nance the fatal blow doesn't even know they killed a man.
Yeah, that's grim. I did not know that.
And so I found this in an article that pointed out it's hard to fathom Lynch wasn't at least partially thinking of the circumstances revolving around Nance's death when he came up with the terrifying Winky's Diner scene in his next feature, Mulholland Drive.
Interesting.
I'm trying to think of the link there, but it's sort of escaping me.
I suppose I think the one they mean is the one with the sort of creepy figure in the dumpster out the back. Yeah, I don't really see the link unless it's that kind of just the name, the parallels, and the kind of fear.
Yeah, the most connection I could see is the idea of some attack by a restaurant that leads to a sudden death.
Yeah, I suppose so.
But that's very tenuous, really.
Yeah, it does seem a bit weak. But yeah, I thought I'd come in and drop the true crime deep dive.
Yeah, so
it's definitely influenced this film.
yeah, and just a weird amount of sort of tragedy sort of stemming from it. There's another odd thing as well that I'll just throw in there. It's slightly different, but also a bit poignant. We'll try and bring the mood up fairly soon, folks. But I'll just point out something that struck me was Richard Pryor turning up in the film in his last film role. And if you... I don't know if that's going to mean as much to Zoomers, but Richard Pryor, obviously best known as a comedian and very lively. At this point in his life, he was suffering from MS, and so that's what his speech is somewhat impacted in that. But he still brings a lot of charm to that role, even if he just has a one scene. But it's quite interesting to see him just for a moment.
Yeah, he's not the sort of actor you would expect to see in a David Lynch film, especially one as dark as this, but he does like to include his little light moments, and just having Richard Pryor pop up on screen for one moment did sort of give me a little, oh, hello there.
Mm. Yeah, it's a nice touch. And I think he does these environments, these kind of very down-to-earth, unpretentious environments really well. Like, they don't feel like sets. They feel very nice and lived in and authentic, and the kind of characters you meet in them feel very authentic and believable. It's amazing that a guy who does these surreal dreamscapes can really ground you in reality very well when he wants to.
Well, yeah, I think it's always him just reinforcing, like you've mentioned in the Mulholland Drive with the straight story. Lynch, it does occasionally give you a nod and a wink and say, listen, I could make this film normal if I wanted to. I just really don't feel like it.
Yeah. Well, Wifey, before you bounce, did you want to quickly give us your score and some thoughts before you go?
Yeah, I'd give this an 8 or a 9 out of 12. 12 burgers with cheese and bacon bits, just to really enjoy the metaphor. I think it's a fantastic film. I enjoyed it a lot more, honestly, than I was expecting to, and I'd love to go back and rewatch it. Really kind of compelling and gripping. And I love the fact that, like, having whinged about Lynch not making it easy, I kind of love the fact that the film doesn't make it easy. It feels like he's not actively hostile to the viewer in this one, at least. He's not taking the piss, and he also, wants you to question and think and consider. Sorry, not taking the Michael. He's not extracting the Michael.
Shocking.
But yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to listening to you two chat about it a bit more.
All right, groovy. Thank you very much, Wifey. Yeah, I mean, I can go into my interpretation a bit. I don't disagree with anything you said, and of course, the beauty of Lynch is there are multiple readings. There are always multiple readings, and that's what I love so much.
Yes, that's why I like that he just refuses to explain his films properly when asked, because
it refuses to elaborate.
Yeah, strangely enough, Eraserhead is my most spiritual movie. Elaborate on that? No. Brilliant. All directors should be like that. It annoys me when you get a director making a really enigmatic film and then just explaining it. Like when you said last week with Possession, the director just came out and was like, "Oh, it's just about my divorce." Oh, great! All the mystique is gone.
You know, for everything else they've done, you've got to respect the Wachowskis. Never explain the films. And I've said this so many times, but they did something that I really wish everyone else would do. So they had they originally planned 4 commentaries for The Matrix, in 2 positive, 2 negative.
I wish they'd just gone all the way in with that, because that's I think every film should do that. That's an incredible idea. But they kind of did a commentary on their own films with do you remember Path of Neo, the old PS2 game?
I do. That was quite crucial to me, proving that Matrix was not a trans metaphor.
Oh, really? Was it? Oh, I've not watched that video all the way through yet. Sorry.
But do not worry about it.
There's the end of that game where the Wachowskis just show up and go, like, yeah, but, well, if we did what we did in the films, it'd be really boring for a game, so here's a gigantic Dragon Ball fight for you. There, go wild.
I had to respect that, really, that they knew what they were doing there, so, yeah. Let's maybe take a detour before I get into my thread, because in terms of how Lynch goes into this, I found it so interesting seeing this as almost a film, like it's almost Blue Velvet morphing into Mulholland Drive. Like I see Lynch getting so much more confident in his style and using symbols that he would absolutely love later. So
I can understand that. Although I would say, seeing as you've not watched Twin Peaks, I assume, well, not watched much of it. I assume you've also not watched Fire Walk with Me.
I haven't, no.
Well, that film, I would say, is definitely where he begins to truly embrace this kind of tone that you're describing here. It's still very much set within the universe of Twin Peaks, but it feels much more purely Lynchian than most of the show did, apart from a few of the episodes that he directed. So I'd say that, yeah, these are definitely... I would say that Fire Walk with Me is more a transition into this period of his work than this being a transition to Mulholland Drive. But I can understand how you could get that feeling.
Yeah, well, I'm taking that from sort of recurring motifs. So I'll just get him up on screen quickly. Where's my man, Mr. Eddie? It's a weird name. So Mr. Eddie here, played by Robert Loggia. Obviously, like Robert Loggia was originally in the running to be Frank Booth in Blue Velvet. So
yes, and the circumstances around that led to his casting in this, and one of my favorite scenes in the whole film.
Yeah. So we have another sort of humble guy ending up in effectively the circle of a violent, unpredictable gangster, played in a very different way. It's a distinct one. Then you've got this wonderful juxtaposition of two females, but you kind of get it twice here. Now, Lynch loves this. In Blue Velvet, and I'm going to forget all the names, you have Laura Dern's character and you have Isabella Rossellini.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm so terrible at this. I should remember the names, but I never do. So you have the super sweet girl and the sort of wild, untamed feminine chaos, if you will. You have the duality of people being extreme and opposing versions of especially female characters, again in Mulholland Drive. But in this, we have not only a super sweet ideal girl played by Natasha Gregson Wagner, mostly clothed, occasionally. Wardrobe budget cuts, I think. Anyway. Yeah, Sheila. And you've got her wild feminine chaos seductress side in Alice. But then, of course, Alice and Renee are both played by Patricia Arquette. So you've got two forms of this duality playing out in Lost Highway. So it's a motif he loves, as well as things like people ringing a phone that doesn't get answered. Big fan of that. Very big fan of that.
Red curtains. You can tell something bad's going to happen to Fred and Renee because their house is decorated completely with red curtains everywhere, which is never a good sign in David Lynch.
No, his colour theory is very strong. I mean, not as strong as Mulholland Drive. He really makes sure you notice.
Yeah, it's is very hard to miss in that film, but in this one, it's a little bit more withheld. I would say it's mainly the red curtains near the beginning that I always take notice of here.
Yeah, and we also get another one of his recurring motifs. I think he sort of tames it down after this, but this shot here, when Pete gets back, he's in the garden. The saturation is turned right up, so you think
little white picket fence.
Yeah, exactly. It's a sort of sarcastic Americana that he's undercutting. So very much like the start of Blue Velvet, where you're seeing an idealized Americana around the town before you sink down into the earth and there's the insects crawling. What he's trying to do here is undermine that. It's not my favorite thing that he does, but after watching this, I think I have a slightly different appreciation of why he does it that warms me to him a bit more. That I'll get into, but it's suffice to say it's a motif he returns to, and it really adds that distinctive Lynchian flavour.
whenever he does this, I never think that he's denigrating or insulting the idea of that Americana idealized American lifestyle, because I've seen him describe in interviews how, he grew up in Montana very much in a similar situation to that, and he treasures that. He seems like a very wholesome guy, so he's never denigrating that. I think he's always mainly drawing those distinctions between the different elements of life. Just because you live in the wonderful, lovely Americana side of town doesn't mean there isn't bad stuff also going on that it could even be built on. But that's no reason to still throw away. Unlike many postmodernists may try and argue in their films subtly that means this entire life should be thrown away. Lynch is still presenting it as something good. It's just that that's not the whole picture always.
Yeah. I used to be quite anti it, and I think I did just read it purely as him saying past bad, in the way that you saw on like Mad Men. I do like that show, but I think that aspect of it is very much there.
I've not watched Mad Men, but I can imagine it would be. I think it's perhaps watching Twin Peaks has made me realize his true appreciation for it, because Twin Peaks is very much a town of duality in a similar way that he presents, Lumberville in Blue Velvet, that town that they live in.
Yes.
That all of the people there, they all have the best intentions. A lot of the people are wholesome, but there is this darker side to it. But that doesn't mean that the dark side is all you should focus on. It just means there's an ongoing battle between these two things. And Lynch is always rooting for the light side to win out, but he's unflinching in presenting, well, in reality, things are never just entirely light or entirely dark. There's these shades of grey. And the third series of Twin Peaks in particular, I would say, has some subtly reactionary themes going throughout it in regards to Twin Peaks. The town itself seems to be in a state of decay, but the actual things that he's pointing at for why it's in a state of decay are very telling. It's all to do with women basically prostituting themselves, family relationships and traditional relationships breaking down, infidelity, drugs seem to have started to seep into Twin Peaks, the town itself. People are all becoming drug addicted. So it's like, okay, he's still saying that Twin Peaks, the idea is something to be aimed for, but there's something has seeped in and corrupted it.
Yeah, I think it's something I need to think on a bit more, because it's more complex than the basic subversive interpretation. I did see this here quickly. Victoria, yes, that's significant. That's significant. So maybe I'll move into it a bit if you want to.
Let's go ahead. I'm happy to go wherever with this.
Okay, so I think everything you said happens. Yep. I have no dispute. And oh gosh, also, can we just point out like how much of this, the idea that a lot of the film is actually an idealized version of something, it's someone's wish fulfillment, where actually reality ends up breaking in and seeping in. He obviously loved it, because then Mulholland Drive is driven by that idea and that device.
That's why I think that Mulholland, this is kind of a blueprint for Mulholland Drive, especially given that the scene that you're showing on screen right now is literally Mulholland Drive itself. Also, that beautiful bit, like you said, there's a bit of lightness in it as well. You know, he delivers, Mr. Eddie delivers a bit of rough justice to a man who's been uncouth, and then gives him a lecture on speeding and road safety. I love it. Tailgating, 500,000 die a year because assholes like you. Oh, it's so wonderful that you're screaming all of that while waving a gun in the guy's face as well. There are many layers of irony in this film. You know, like we said, David Lynch has this amazing sense of humor, as the observatory line shows. I love it. This bit was kind of, it's a charming bit of madness with a fair bit of commentary and tied into it. What's a good way into it? I'm very much informed by how I read Mulholland Drive, and I think again a lot of the ideas are shared, and I think one of the main ideas running through this is David Lynch telling us in some rather revealing terms about his difficulties with Hollywood. I've not really considered it in such a way. Last viewing on Sunday, I definitely got some parallels between LA, the Hollywood Hills, the porn industry, women doing rather uncouth things for the sake of very, very sleazy men. But in terms of relating that strictly to Hollywood, of course, this is nowhere near as direct as Mulholland Drive is, with Mulholland Drive literally being about a starlet trying to break into Hollywood.
Yeah, and failing, and so her cope projection is that the system's very rigged against her. But Lynch also builds in identifiable, recognizable moments that you can connect to real life incidents. So it's kind of him saying, look, yes, it is sort of her cope, but these things do happen.
Yes, and I think the other important thing is, once again, Lynch never takes a one-dimensional view on it. In Mulholland Drive, there's very much the clear implication that, listen, Betty, Diane, whatever you want to call her, she is also culpable for everything that happens in that story. Even if it was her being taken advantage, she accepted that on some level and went along, and it's only because she failed that she has resorted to the means that she has.
Absolutely, yeah. She failed. She made some, out of insecurity, she made some very bad decisions, and then she tries to hide the reality of that from herself by telling herself a series of lies, as we see very much in Lost Highway as well. So we can't, I mean, here we have this, I love this thing that we have with Alice here coming back, and she's just like, you're obviously getting echoes of Hitchcock's Vertigo here.
Oh yeah, I've not watched Vertigo in a while, but I know what you're referring to. Have you noticed that that in every single scene, I'm sure you've probably noticed it and tied it in, that she's constantly, no matter the situation, wearing high heels, and they're either white or black high heels, even in situations where it's just impractical, like she gets out of bed and she's wearing the high heels.
Oh, constantly, yeah. Yeah, she's sort of an idealized and dangerous form. You know, she's as the man, the real life Fred feels he was rejected and impotent. So as you say, he imagines a super sex bomb who's super into him. But he's also got the sweet girl on the side. It's the old mother whore thing going on, satisfying both needs. You get that amazing line from the police about who are watching him, which I won't repeat on a family stream.
Yeah, I know the one you're on about.
But the sort of undercurrent of messaging here, and I might not word this too well, so bear with me. But
that's absolutely fine.
There's there's this undercurrent of warning about the film industry and the danger of film. So you can take a more trivial example, like the fear of the video camera, and the video camera can be intrusive, it can be dangerous, it can have the meaning you said, but it can also be this idea that the camera is going a place it doesn't belong, and that the person operating the camera can be a source of fear. I will get that menacing moment up here.
Do you mind if I tie this into something else? Because
please.
Along with that, you can tie it into Inland Empire's exploration of the loss of identity that comes with being involved in films, losing yourself in the role. Because you, as you've got up here, the mystery man brings up the camera and begins to ask Fred, "Who are you?" This idea that if you're inside the camera lens, you lose a piece of who you are.
As he literally does it's got those meanings in your interpretation, absolutely, but I think there's also you can build in the idea of the camera as a threat, the man behind the camera as a threat. It's unknowable, it's mysterious, you don't really know, you're the subject of it, and you're quite powerless before it. But there are other things as well, like the idea that Renee, a relatively innocent girl, under the influence of a connected, powerful person like Mr. Eddie, gets transformed. You get this, she can't be Renee. She has to play the role. She has to become Alice. She has to be dolled up the way that they want her to be. And Alice gives her origin story effectively as being brought in. And this reminds me massively of an audition.
Oh, yeah.
Now, for people who haven't seen the film, would you like to do your best to describe what happens in here? Because I've been yammering for a bit.
Oh, would you like me to do the best?
If you'd like to describe what happens in this scene.
What is happening is that Alice is describing to Pete how it was she became acquainted with Mr. Eddie after they spend either the first or second night together. And she explains that she met a man at a place called Moats who told her that there was a job going. She goes to this job and she's ushered in to Mr. Eddie's room here. The second she stops in front of him, a man points a gun at her head. Mr. Eddie nods and she is forced to strip in a very... It's got Marilyn Manson behind it that makes it feel like there's an element that's supposed to be a little bit sexy about it, but it's mainly horribly uncomfortable because at the end she is seemingly forced to perform other acts for him that she may not want to, but she's doing primarily for survival because she had a gun to her head.
Yeah. Very, very good summary of that. So that, in light of the revelations about Mr. Weinstein's activities, and far from just Mr. Weinstein's activities, this seems like I know people say this a lot about Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut, but I think there's a bit of that energy here too, that Lynch is pulling back the curtain a bit and showing you what he's seen. Interestingly, when Fred is in the jail cell, just before he transfigures, he starts seeing things projected on what looks like curtains withdrawing.
Yeah.
And those curtains withdrawing is almost like saying it's a theatrical thing. Now, you could have used any imagery, but the idea of bringing the theatre into it via theatre curtains, I think, is another deliberate choice to make us think of Hollywood. So we have this scene, which feels a little bit showing us behind the scenes, the dangers of the casting couch, the powerful men with a lot of money. But it's paired up with something else that I think is much more shocking, which is, if I can find it, in the cabin. Got it. So that's a sort of Hollywood promise, but I think we see something that's actually closer to reality.
Yes.
We see it.
Oh, carry on.
Okay. So here, this is the cabin where the mystery man seems to live, or to give a very... That's how I would explain it. It's where they go to meet the mystery man. But it's just grim. There's rubbish on the floor. There's a couch covered in plastic wrap to protect it. And I think that's the casting couch. So it's like the contrast of the Hollywood glamour and the reality of the seedy rundown area and the couch where you have to do what you have to do to get the role. Where, incidentally, this is where we next see the mystery man with his camera. So it's tying together these sinister elements. And I've got another few things to say. So, Harry, if you had something about this room you wanted to say?
I was mainly going to say that I've always struggled to understand how the cabin fits into my own interpretation. So that's a very interesting point you brought up. I was going to ask as well, I've never had a particularly good grasp on why we see the explosion of the cabin in reverse. The most I could ever really put together for that was the idea of a literal visual metaphor for putting the pieces back together. So, like, Fred begins to understand the situation he's in a little bit better as they get closer to it. So, what do you have any idea of what's going on there?
No, I've got absolutely nothing for the cabin. It's very striking. It sort of works with the idea that Lynch is going non-linear. So this film is structured basically like a mobius strip. Which, if you guys Google mobius strip and just to visualize it, because I'll have a nightmare trying to describe it. But effectively, it becomes continuous. It's hinting at it's just unending. It's an unending cycle. And so seeing the cabin do an explosion in reverse strikes me as a sort of similar non-linearity, but that I feel is a very weak. It's not explaining, it's just saying, oh, it's kind of doing this thing. So I don't have much to go on for the cabin.
Yeah, like I say, with my explanation as well, just, it's a visual metaphor for putting the pieces together. I suppose within my own interpretation, it fits well enough, but that's the best I can say about it.
Yeah, it's a bizarre thing, the idea that you have to go out into the desert for it. It has to be in an isolated place. It's...
Yeah, the reverse, once again, it might literally just be Lynch messing with us.
It's very possible. I almost read it as one take I had more about the desert was about that they had to. This was an attempt to run as far as you can from your situation.
Oh yeah,
which they're literally doing. They're running from their crimes the way Pete and Alice do their crime. They run from their crime as far as they can into the desert where there's basically nothing. There's nowhere to go, and at the end they can't find what they're looking for because the cabin is empty. And then they make love on the desert floor. And even then, like, that's all you've got. But then Alice says, "You'll never have me." So it's like the very last thing is stripped away from him. So
yeah.
you could say, I didn't find what I need, but I've got Alice. And then she says no. She wanders off.
See, for me, I've always taken that as being the final acceptance. Perhaps within my own interpretation, the idea is you go to the cabin looking for answers, looking for the other man who really committed the crimes, and it's empty. There's no one else. It's just Fred. It's just Pete, and it's just Alice. They have passionate love one last time, and it is the most, how would I describe this, sensual sex scene in the film. And I believe the song that's playing beneath it, or at least the stinging violins near the end, is literally called the Siren Song. This idea that he's within his own fantasy, he's finally got her. He's finally able to grasp her, this wild feminine energy, and yet she still at the end says, "You'll never have me," which is what brings Fred back to the surface and why he takes over for the rest of the narrative.
Absolutely. But while they're having that scene, the way it's shot is, I think, quite a big clue. And it's this thing. Now, it's a bit hard to get in the image, but if you watch this, they're lit by the car headlamp. You only focus on the one, and it flickers. It flickers, there's dust going in front of it. It looks so much like a movie projector, and it puts so much light on them that they look like a projected image, an overexposed image on the other side of a projection frame. It's, again, this is what I'm thinking of, bringing in the idea of films, the fact that it's so passionate, it's almost like staged and theatrical and pornographic. It's an idea of an unreality that is accentuated by the fact that the headlamp is made to look like a projector lamp.
I can see that.
Yeah, it's hard to capture with the image, but if you watch it, folks, have a look at the way they're framed with it. And then throughout the rest of the film, we're just getting lots of shots of, kind of the parties with the connected people where there's just, how can I say? I had to be careful getting my images for this, as you can imagine.
There is a certain debauchery going on, perhaps?
There's certain debauchery where they're hanging around, and the footage of the pornography then shifts into horror.
It becomes a snuff film, which is Honestly, a very disturbing, and it's important as well that he seems to be. I think Fred is showing this footage to Mr. Eddie. It's like he's showing him his crimes back to him.
Yeah, very much so. And as part of this reading of this undercurrent, I think it's Lynch just sort of telling you what's going on, that there's actually a lot of girls brought in through one side, given the sort of casting couch experience, and some of them go onto the big screen and some of them are disposed of, basically. You know, in this, he's made it into a snuff film, but it's effectively just telling you that they're ruined. You know, some of the things that you hear about how people are used in Hollywood is, you know, not far off this. So I do feel that Lynch is kind of showing us under the curtain here. And it's quite clever imagery here. Lynch is doing this in 1997. One of the films I'm reviewing this Christmas, The Craft Legacy, it tries to make this same point, but terribly. Yeah, I'll give the quick scene description. Our protagonist comes back into her house and she hears a woman screaming, and it's a bit tense and scary. And so she's looking for the source of the screams, and she pushes open a door, and it's her stepbro, Jack in it, watching Prawn.
Wow, how tactful, how delightful, what an excellent scene. That sounds a bit...
It's an interesting message, you know. It's like, hey guys, did you know that it kind of seems like prawn and violence to women are kind of hard to distinguish, you know, without tons of extra detail. It's like, okay, you know,
that's very clumsy though.
It's incredibly clumsy, you know. You have to ask, like, okay, so there was no extra helpful dialogue. Really, for like 2 minutes, there's nothing that gives it away. And also, the main thing is, where's her stepbro playing it over the speakers?
Yeah, that seems like a rather foolish thing to do in a house that has other occupants in it. But, you know, like, young men make all sorts of crazy, stupid decisions.
Yeah. So, you know, it tried to make the point, but it absolutely mangled it and just didn't think it through. Whereas Lynch, I think, gets the same point through much better without breaking the story around him. We also get our little Marilyn Manson cameo in this section, which I'll flash on screen again quickly.
I managed to trick one of my friends into watching this by telling her Marilyn Manson was in the film, and she got really, really excited, and the entire way through, she was asking me, where's Marilyn Manson? And then in the last 5 minutes, he shows up for 5 seconds on screen, and I was like, there you go. She wasn't pleased with me.
You know, you gotta do what you have to get people appreciating Lynch, you know.
That's what. Well, mainly I got them to watch the film so I could give them my hour-long breakdown afterwards.
Nice. I feel I caused Harry to have an hour-long breakdown after Mulholland Drive, so I haven't you know, tried to inflict it on him again. But
I would have
just around the idea of it's basically just. Oh, sorry, Harry. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just joking about Harry, and carry on.
Bless. No, we love him. He's a good lad. Yeah, so that's just rounding off. Basically, what I'm saying is just the undercurrent is that there's a regular, continuous references to a rather sordid, dangerous industry that's very dishonest, that will transform you, put you on camera, degrade you, and ultimately dispose of you in a grim way as it pleases. And it may have this superficial air of respectability, but it's at its heart very nasty and dangerous. And I think Lynch is basically dobbing in Hollywood in this film.
I can definitely see that interpretation. I can see Mr. Eddie being a real manifestation of all of the vile kinds of characters that Lynch has probably met and had to interact with over the years. The people who put on the veneer of respectability and being a professional, like Mr. Eddie does when he first shows up to the garage, to Arnie's garage, and then later on in the film, he just reveals himself to be a complete scumbag. How would you say that most of the initial part of the film plays into this reading, where it's mainly Fred and Renee and leading up to Fred murdering her? Would you say that Fred murdering her has a similar message to this part of the film, where it's all captured on camera, it's a brutal thing happening to a woman, as portrayed by a man, this time less traumatizing and more just you're dead now?
I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, because that's why I really like your interpretation of this third act of the film, and it really brings together a lot of the disparate elements that I always struggled with. But the part is that it's difficult to fit the whole film into one consistent interpretation or reading, unlike with Mulholland Drive, which it's kind of clearer to put all the pieces together neatly.
Yeah, I mean, in both of them, you do. There's a strong through line, and you can notice like a little theme, the undercurrent in there about dodgy Hollywood stuff, and cuckoldry. Here, it's not as it does feel a bit more in segments.
Yeah, because that's the thing. I don't see what the connection of the first third of the film as much would have to do with this, other than the videotapes being received, mainly because they don't really. Unless Andy is supposed to be, in those earlier scenes, he's supposed to be some kind of film producer. Although, then again, actually, Renee early on mentions after the initial party where he first meets the mystery man, when they're driving away, he says, "How did you meet that guy Andy anyway?" And Renee specifically says, "I got offered a job at a place called Moki's," which is obviously the same story that Alice gives later. So perhaps just foreshadowing to what's revealed later, that Renee also went through the same process. But at the same time, Renee seems to be more than happy to indulge with Andy. She's basically cooking Fred straight to his face in that scene early on, where he first meets the mystery man. Because around Fred, she's very distant. Whenever they're watching the videotapes together, they always sit very, very far apart from one another. And then after a few drinks, she's basically letting Andy lap her up in his arms.
It's tricky because obviously we deal with a very unreliable narrator, but there is a tension in Fred that I think your description of him as insecure is very right. I think he's got massive sort of issues with Renee as a whole figure. So he does this thing where he wants to see Renee as completely separate from Alice, to the point where we have two versions of this photo.
Yeah, that's kind of what I put together right before this stream, actually, was that because I never really got the photo changing. But you are right. I think that it's the idea of, okay, these are two separate people. They don't have anything to do with one another. The attitudes that they have towards sex. Renee's far more reserved. She's obviously not the same as Alice, but they're actually one and the same. And he acknowledges that at the end. And in my interpretation, he acknowledges her being the person that he was trying to avoid her being, that being someone who cheated on him. But he still separates himself from any crimes that he committed if there was a real guy called Andy and he ended up killing him. Within that police scene where you see that the photo is changed, they're still talking about how Pete Dayton's fingerprints are all over the crime scene. So he is still separating himself from whatever crimes that he committed.
Yeah, I don't know if you noticed, but in that first lovemaking scene where he fails to get that S rank, he
wasn't smoking sexy style.
No, he's looking at her hand. Okay, this is where Lynch rewards a bit of obsessive focus, and I know there's so much I just have not caught in this. Like what you said about him ringing home to the phone. I didn't get that it was his home phone. I was going across the film trying to work out which phone he tried to call. So you actually made sense of that for me. But in the first failed lovemaking scene, he looks at her hand and we get a good look at it, and it's got the black nail varnish on and the wedding ring. And later when he meets Alice, she doesn't have this, but on one of the final hookups with her, when she asks him to do, I think it's when she asks him to do the robbery, he notices her hand and she's got the nail varnish and ring on.
Oh, I hadn't noticed that. That's a great catch.
She might not have the ring, but she definitely has the nail varnish and it's new. And he looks right at it and he starts to freak out a bit. And I just thought, oh, yeah, that's his reality breaking down.
Oh, that's when he ends up going upstairs and seeing that very strange vision of her, isn't it?
Oh, yes, I've got it. I mean, that's a whole other thing, is what is that vision? Hang on, I've got it here.
I see that as his, like, unfiltered perception of who Renee/Alice was. Like, his deepest subconscious screaming at him, telling him she was always a horrible person, she's mocking you, she's making fun of you, she deserved it. That's how I see that scene.
Yeah. What do you make it like? Does she have red hair in that, or is it just the lighting? Is it like a third version of her? Or is it just lighting?
If it is my interpretation of it being like this even deeper repressed idea of who she was, then it might be that they gave her red hair, but it's so difficult to tell. I wouldn't be surprised if David Lynch did do something to her to make her look more evil and devilish, but I couldn't say for certain.
Yeah. So we have Pete encounters this room, and I'll just show you that for anyone who hasn't watched the film yet, later Fred comes across the exact same room. And this, I guess, is him sort of trying to exorcise his demons, basically. For trying to make sense of this, I think maybe one thing is maybe Renee has a past, and that's something that Fred is deeply uncomfortable with. So it's very difficult for him to see her and think of her as having this past. And so he does just have to split her off. And even when he seems to me so insecure that even though he's basically the headliner of the show, we only ever see him doing the solo. Although you could say maybe that's his psyche has to only show us the bit where he's the sole point of attraction.
Well, I think the solo I take as being representative of his impotence, to an extent, because of how strained he looks, because of how short the notes are, because of just the squealing sound of it. It sounds like somebody's struggling. And so I see it as, especially given that, I will say, the saxophone, the way he holds it, where the horn comes out, it's a little bit phallic.
Interesting. Okay. We go for that. I mean, there can be multiple levels in here. I mean, if you want to throw... So we've got that interpretation. We've got the idea that he's only showing us a bit where he is the sole focus of attention.
And
I'll throw you a third one.
Oh, yeah, okay.
During that scene, you got the sudden... As we talked about, the sound is so low that you probably all turned the volume up. And then you get blasted with the sudden music. Do you remember what the lighting is doing in that bit when he's playing his saxophone solo?
No, usually I'm paying attention to just my ears, so I haven't noticed anything with the lighting.
It's flashing blue.
Okay.
So we've got a few moments in the film throughout where he's getting flashes of blue in a sort of danger sense. The most obvious reference is it's him being electrocuted. Now, if this, you might say, hang on, but that happens at the end. You said that for when he's being chased by police. It's like,
well,
Lynch sets this up as a Mobius strip.
Yeah. I think the whole reason it's a Mobius strip is because it's almost like a cycle that doesn't necessarily have to apply to Fred alone. It's something that can happen to loads of men. So for all you could interpret, when he rings that doorbell at the end, it might not be Fred he's even saying it to. It might be the next poor schmuck who ends up doing something awful like this due to his own insecurities. That's why I feel like I take a rather masculine interpretation of it from and why I connect it to PT, this idea of this malevolent force compelling men to murder their loved ones. But yeah, also David Lynch is a smart guy, and he knows that the brain doesn't exactly work in a linear fashion anyway. So something that you perceive in your head when you're dreaming could potentially just be like a split second of brain activity. So just because it's happening at the end doesn't mean that the whole film couldn't even just be taking place in a split second in his brain as he's being fried anyway.
Yeah, if this whole thing is him avoiding reality, as you say, yeah, it could all be that. That works for me as well. Also, since you mentioned PT,
yeah,
that also has someone replaying things constantly.
Oh yeah, going around the corridor over and over and over again.
Yeah. This is the long version of it. It's, Fred is just cycling and cycling.
That is true. I found it interesting as well. I read an interview where I watched an interview where I think Lynch said that his brother's an electrician or something. So I wonder if that's why electricity and flashing imagery shows up so often in his films, purely because he just associates it with his brother.
Could be. Oh man, that's just an extra layer to try and decipher.
Oh no, more complicated.
I mean, it does throw me off when you talk about the police say you think reality is fully intruded at that point when the police are investigating the burglary. We're seeing this photo here, and they say Pete Dayton's fingerprints are everywhere. I mean, that is a little hard to reconcile, but I suppose we are still sort of in the fantasy at that point.
I don't think. Same with Mulholland Drive. Same with maybe Inland Empire, but who bloody knows with Inland Empire, to be perfectly honest. But I don't think anything we see in this film is taking place in the real world, so to speak. Same with Mulholland Drive. The whole thing is some warped, twisted dream reality that Fred has constructed for himself, which he still can't really wrap his head around properly because reality keeps seeping in.
Yeah, Victoria's raised this here that you get little signs. So, he's trying to hold his reality together as Pete, and then hearing the sax on the radio freaks him out, and he has to just turn it off.
I always really like that scene.
Yeah, there's also that. This is so good. The first time he sees Alice, and I don't. Was it Joe or John? One of you pointed out that the name Alice is like Alice in Wonderland, and I really like that. Like if whoever said that, fantastic. Great point. I hadn't considered it. There is a lot of symbolism here. I mean, people have done numerology on the car registrations, that all the car registration numbers add up to 7.
How about
you can go deep. You can go deep with this film, but
Alice being associated with the color white as well could be chasing the white rabbit down the rabbit hole.
I can see it. When he first sees her, though, he has this moment of distrust.
Understandably so.
Yeah, it's like he's in a fake identity, and then he sees her in a fake identity. It's like the narrator seeing what's her name, Marsha in Fight Club.
Oh yes.
What's her name? Helena Bonham Carter's character, anyway.
I think Marsh. No, I'm not going to bother.
No, Marla.
Oh, there we go. Thank you.
See, I can't do the names. It takes me ages. So, yeah, he should be he is freaked out by her because that's almost like, oh, someone else is lying, but he also can't stay away from her. And I think that's part of why his reality will break down, because it's he can't keep it together. He has these base impulses that he can't control as Pete, and he couldn't control them as Fred. And that's why it's just absolutely destined to fail for him.
Yeah, that's the whole siren aspect of her, because I can understand if I was trying to be Pete, why this woman who is related to my obviously very dangerous benefactor, Mr. Eddie, who I have some kind of strange relationship where I'm almost like a freelance engineer for him, if she just came along and said to me, hey, would you like to come to a motel and have sex with me? I would also be a little bit, on the back foot, thinking, wait, I'm being played here.
Mm. Yeah, he doesn't go for it. And I don't think we've said this enough, but it's an absolutely fantastic performance by Patricia Arquette. Just
yes, she really captures many different dimensions of the female mystique.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I don't know about this scene, but maybe I'm reading too much into it. But then, isn't this the stream to go out and do a massive reach on? It's about it's about now. We're in the scene. So in this scene, Pete has followed Alice's instructions. He's broken into their house. He's murdered Andy. He's
comically murdered himself.
Yeah, well, yes, enabled Andy to comically murder himself. And then he's seen the photo. He's seen her nails. Reality's breaking it down a bit. He starts to feel queasy. And she's acting different. She's suddenly much more dominant. And he starts feeling a bit sick. He turns around, and behind him is being projected, how can I say, a woman being taken rather vigorously from behind.
I think it's her. I think it's supposed to be her.
Yeah. And it's almost like, I don't know, like she's, how can I say, there's a certain parallel. Like he's being taken advantage of too. He's being, he's in a weak position, let's put it that way.
I mean, all of a sudden, when he comes downstairs back after seeing that vision, she just pulls a gun on him. And she ends up giving him the gun, but it's obviously to keep him off kilter a little bit because he can't trust her. And this is where he starts to recognize that. You are right. It's the second. Before then, she's playing the damsel in distress. And it's when he agrees to do this robbery that her attitude shifts. Before she's playing the, I'm so weak, I'm in distress, I need help. She's putting on this voice with a quiver, and he goes, all right, I'll help her. And then all of a sudden she switches into dominant, confident mode. All right, here's what we're going to do. You're going to take this bus and you're going to come down. He's going to be upstairs with me, yada, yada, yada. That's where the switch is, but this is where I think Pete/Fred actually notices it, because all of a sudden he's involved in a much bigger crime than he intended. And as far as I'm concerned, I think the whole Pete and Alice is, as I said, that sort of wish fulfillment where all of a sudden she's the one sexually chasing him. She's cheating on somebody else with him. He's trying to have it all as the Pete persona. He's like, I can have everything I want and I can stay in control. I can manage this, which is where the mystery man ends up showing back up in that wonderful scene where they're over the phone and Eddie hands it over to the mystery man and he explains to him, in the East, they send a man out to an area where they never know where they're going to end up dying. You'll notice in that scene as well, Pete's parents then vanish from the rest of the film. He looks back up where they were standing and they're gone. And that's just one element of this construction he's created for himself falling apart. And then he goes here, he thinks he's saving the damsel in distress. It turns out she's taking advantage of him. Within his own subconscious, I see this as his own confirmation that I was right to doubt her. I was right to suspect her. She was always a harlot. She was always distrustworthy.
That's Fred taking over control again. He doesn't trust her. He can't help it. I think it's him blaming her again. Right?
Yeah, that's how I see it. It's him blaming her, and that's why the picture melds from being Alice and Renee as two separate people to just going back to Renee. And in Fred's head, he's like, okay, I tried looking at her from a different perspective. She's still the same. She's still the person who cheated on me. So, I was right in what I did. But then later on, when he ends up killing Mr. Eddie, he lets Renee go. So that might once again be him absolving himself from it and being like, well, actually what I'll do is take the root of the problem. And I do think that with Mr. Eddie being a kind of blockade to sexual activity, Mr. Eddie himself could be a little bit of a stand-in for impotence, that he needs to eliminate his impotence, and that's what's really holding him back now.
Yeah, I mean, he might also just be a kind of cipher, a sort of creation like Fred didn't do anything wrong. Mr. Eddie's the bad guy. You know, Eddie, Fred, sound kind of close.
He
you
does
know, he has to
end up-
create a cipher that he can punish.
yeah, he does end up teaming up with the Mystery Man at the end, though, when they take out Mr. Eddie together in a rather gory scene, which is pretty brutal, to be honest. And once again, I see that as Fred embracing the darker aspect of himself. Whether he's acknowledged that this is the darker aspect of himself, there's that bit where Mystery Man whispers into his ear and you don't hear anything. I think that is just supposed to be the two of them connecting, almost like the devil whispering on his shoulder, here's all the bad things that you need to do.
Yeah, I gather Robert Blake did think the Mystery Man was the devil.
I can understand why.
Yeah, I think it's much more complex than that. Like, there are some really interesting clues, like the fact that the Mystery Man is always someone who is in the house.
He was invited in as well, yeah.
And it seems like he's this kind of unflinching honesty. Like, he's almost the you that you don't want to admit.
But who
and
always
that's why eventually they can lie at the end and take out Mr. Eddie.
Yes, I will say, just because we haven't said it yet, that initial scene that introduces the Mystery Man is easily one of my favorite Lynch scenes in any of his films, where he just walks up to him in the middle of the party and all of the sound around them drops out and it's just the two of them. That's one of the things I love about Lynch is I think he does all his own audio in the films and TV. I think he does most of it himself. He has an uncanny ability to recreate the sound of blood rushing to your head. It's one of the things I think makes it so effective at being uncanny and unsettling.
Yeah, and just absolutely unforgettable as well. You know, it's just iconic. It's fantastic, and this as well. It's so iconic. By the way, there is no way that... Wait, hang on. Before I make a fool of myself, let me do a very quick check. When was Hellraiser 3 released?
Oh, I've only ever seen the first Hellraiser. Are the others worth watching?
I would say Hellraiser 2, I cannot comment, is definitely worth watching. I can't comment much beyond that. 3, I wouldn't say so. It's pure schlock, and I've heard decent things about the reboot, but I haven't watched it myself, so I couldn't comment. But I do think the series would benefit from a reboot because things got very messy. But no, Hellraiser 3 came out in 1992, so no connection. Never mind. I saw a bit of a similarity between that and a Cenobite. I think, I mean, that might be about everything I had on Lost Highway. If there was anything else you wanted to go into, Harry, we could do that.
I think I've gone over everything that I wanted to as well. Just this is a film that I could talk about forever, but for the main points of my own interpretation, I think I've managed to go over it. How would you rank my interpretation? How would you say it stacks up to what we're actually presented in the film?
I think it's very compelling, and I think it does explain it in a way. I mean, I hesitate to say explain with a Lynch film.
Yes.
But it gives a reading that is coherent and matches and also works with things that he's gone on to do. And it's a kind of interesting psychological process that he has said he likes to display.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was just the reading that hit closest to home for me as somebody interpreting the film as something entirely from Fred's perspective and him being this rather pathetic, insecure man, how he feels about this. And David Lynch has been married a number of times, so once again, I imagine he's drawing off some autobiographical details of his own. Not that he's ever chopped up a woman before, but you're married. You're in a civil partnership with a woman, right? You know what it's like. Sometimes you do just want to chop them up.
In case waifu is listening, can neither confirm nor deny. I'll tell you what we did like, though. I mean, to possibly veer off, he certainly knows his side of things. But I mean, I risk it being an unpopular take, but I said the thing that I really liked him doing in Mulholland Drive was capturing the kind kind of unhealthy, obsessive quality of some lesbian attraction that I think that it's not particularly sweet. It's not anything you want to talk about in a pride parade, but that really struck home. If you listen to, I think the examples I gave are like Tegan and Sarah albums, which is a lesbian musician duo.
Yeah, you were talking about that last time. Where do you see that kind of connection here? I know in the last scene where you see some of the footage from films that Alice has been involved in before Marilyn Manson, it seems that she is lesing it up a little bit there. Would you say there or elsewhere in the film?
I'm a bit relaxed on that interpretation. I'm a bit laissez-faire, if you will. But sorry about that. I'm so terrible. It is somewhat unrelated to this. I mean, there are different kinds of obsession, but it struck me that he was able to, I think, see quite deeply and quite display something that felt really authentic about the lesbian side of things. And possibly unpopular take, it sounds a bit bad, but a lot of that romance can have quite an unhealthy edge to it before it finds a healthy edge, which it does not always do. Potentially unpopular take there.
Well, I'll just say I've known people over the years whose experiences they've described to me line up quite well with your take that you've just given there. So I will double down on your take and say that it seems pretty plausible to me.
Yeah, thank you. If anyone disagrees, please just read some literature. Read lesbian literature. Listen to lesbian music groups. It's all there.
Yeah, and this film definitely captures the opposite side of that, of the male obsession with a woman. Because even though he hates her, obviously Renee/Alice is still the object of Fred's desire. He is still obsessed with her because he hates her so much for potentially having cheated on him. You can only hate something that much if you do truly have a certain amount of love for it.
Yeah,
and that's an obsessive and dangerous love.
It's got all that complexity in there. He hates her, he needs her, he loves her, he forgives her. She's angelic in white, but she's also an absolute slattern. You know,
I've not heard that term in a while.
You know, we throw it in occasionally, you know. But it's all this complexity here, and you know, we lay out this reading, and it's a kind of thing that, you know, the Guardian might actually love, but I think they don't like it. They wouldn't see it because it's not absolutely spelled out in a direct monologue from a character with green hair.
I know. It would have been such a better film if we'd had one of those as well.
I just seen you know, there's one more thing we have to discuss, which is the music.
Oh, yeah.
This sent me on such a Rammstein binge.
To be fair, it's all stuff off the first album, and I've never listened to the first album from Rammstein, so I need to give it a proper go.
Oh, I can add a bit to that if you want.
Oh, yeah.
So that first album is Herzleid, or how would you do? Deep pain, a pain in your heart, an acheful sorrow. I don't know how you translate that or what the English would be, but let's call it a deep heartfelt pain would be Herzleid. And the songs that they play are Rammstein, which is also, it's the name of a town, but also Battering Ram. But also the song with the lyrics is the song Heartbreak.
Oh, is that the one?
Heartbreak? Yeah, maybe Heartbreak.
Is that the one that sounds like almost deep Gregorian chanting?
Yes. So it's a song Heirate mich or Marry Me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All of the song choices are very, very deliberate in this film, and I do really like that. It was Heirate mich. Is that
Heirate mich. I'm just going to look it up because I don't remember all the lyrics, but the key word is like einem Jahr ist der allein. So he's been alone for a year, aka maybe while he was in prison. Oh, yeah. I don't want the translation. I want the original.
Onto lining up with your interpretation as well. I don't want to be too lowbrow, but I can also see, given Rammstein's predilections in their music videos and song subjects, that deep pain could also have an ulterior meaning in this film.
I'm sorry, Harry. I missed that while I was looking up lyrics. Could you just repeat that, please?
I was just going to say that knowing the predilections of Rammstein and their music videos and some of the things they have gotten up to on stage before, deep pain could have another euphemistic meaning as well.
I see you also like the way they perform Buch dich.
Yeah. Oh, God.
One of my favourites,
Wish I hadn't found that on YouTube as a teenager.
Okay, so the lyrics that they play for Heirate mich is Man sieht ihn die Kirche schleichen seit einem Jahr ist allein. You see him creeping around the church for a year, he's been alone. Die Trauer nahm ihm alle Sinne, schlaft jede Nacht bei ihrem Stein. So grief took all his senses. He sleeps next to her tombstone every night. The song gets far less, how can you say, wholesome from there.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, I know Rammstein. I can guess where that song's going.
Yeah, but Lynch doesn't include any of those following lyrics. He just includes those. So it's a man sort of obsessed around the woman he's lost, and he lost her a long time ago. And we do have a bit of a time skip by the time that he's in the jail. So I think the lyrics are helping us there, cluing us into reality breaking in. I think people are, Heartache probably is best. Thank you. I hadn't listened to them for a few years, so I thought it was all from Sehnsucht or Jealousy, but it's Herzleid that he took it from. There's also the song Various Ominous Groans by Trent Reznor, which I thought was quite lovely.
That lines up. Shockingly enough, Trent Reznor shows up in person in the third series of Twin Peaks, because Twin Peaks is almost a variety show in the last series where there'll just be random intervals where you cut to the I think the bar's called the Roadhouse, and there will just be random performances, and you get to see an entire song. At one point played by Nine Inch Nails, and at another point Eddie Vedder shows up. It's like Lynch got all of his buddies to come along and play songs that he liked for the show.
Yeah, I don't think I'd cope with season 3 of Twin Peaks.
I think you're missing out. But if you don't like the idea of the show messing with you, then season 3 might drive you insane, because there is an entire 16-episode plot line that is almost entirely messing with you. And I love it. I think it's wholesome, and I do think it lends itself to a particular trad life leaning reading, I should say, in the idea of a good wife and children makes a man whole and happy. But you would have to watch it yourself for me to explain further.
I may yet get back to it. I abandoned a series called Dark about 3 years ago, a German sci-fi, quite grim. Got back to that recently, so I've been plowing through it. So there may be a long delay, but I may eventually get back to finishing Twin Peaks. Joe, I saw that. I was interested. I looked to see if that symbol turned up on Pete's hand. I didn't catch it, but the notes I saw were that it's actually a musical notation to indicate something echoing or a note being played for an extended period of time. So I wasn't, but
I've heard that well. It's similar to how his saxophone solo continues after the initial band stops playing. I think the most I could take from it, if it is supposed to mean anything, and given that it's highlighted, I would assume it is, would be the idea that Renee and Fred's relationship has gone on far too long, well beyond the point where it's broken down and there's any romantic interest shared between the two of them anymore.
Yeah. I mean, we there's so much in this. We could go. This could be a 5-hour stream focusing on every single symbol, but I think now is probably a good time to close it off. So, as is traditional, we'll do some closing thoughts and scores. We still use the out of 12 burgers system because why not? We found nothing to replace it, and I love it now. So chat, if you want to get your scores in as well. I think we had an 8 or a 9 from Waifu. Harry, would you feel like kicking off the closing thoughts and scores?
Well, my closing thoughts are that this is a criminally underappreciated and underanalyzed film. It really deserves more of a look in from a lot of people who are missing out if you've not been able to track it down. It has some of my favorite Lynch sequences, some of my favorite Lynch characters. It's worth it for Mr. Eddie screaming at the man down the highway. That's worth the price of admission alone. And the overall mystery that lingers past the end of the film, because it is the Mobius strip, it is so enigmatic and mysterious, and the atmosphere of the film is so gripping, I think makes it a very, very worthwhile film. I personally, because I'm a bit of a fanboy, I'm going to perhaps sound a bit too glowing here when I say I give it my personal score is 12 out of 12 burgers, if that's how we're ranking. And they're going to be
very strong.
They're going to be high quality burgers as well. These are gourmet. These have got the special sauce.
The Wagyu beef is coming out.
Oh yeah.
Oh, nice.
Those are well treated cows.
They get massaged and fed beer, so I gather. We should all be so lucky.
Yep. And in fact, the cows themselves, they just choose to lie down and be made into burgers. That's just how well behaved they are.
Bless. All right, yeah. I thought you might go for the 12 out of 12, and I'm not going to argue. I have my own. Candyman is my 12 out of 12, so I don't begrudge anyone giving a score like that. Yeah, I think people are. It's a film that massively rewards attention. I think that's what I would say for this. We're going to see the scores trickle in now.
Yeah, that's why I've come back to it like 5 times.
And this is my third watch, and I was lukewarm on it the first time. I found it a bit confusing. Possibly I was a bit drunk, and so it didn't make sense. You know, I'll put
You
my
were
hand up.
sober, and it still didn't make sense.
But the third time, after Mulholland Drive, it's almost like some directors, I like to say, they train their audience, which sounds really patronizing. But sometimes if you're doing something interesting, you need to. And I don't object to it. I like Mike Flanagan training the audience to look for certain things. And I like David Lynch training us to think about the film in a certain way, to not take it for granted. So not taking it for granted at all here on the third viewing, it just sort of, it was absolutely entrancing. So absorbing. Maybe the pace was a tiny bit slow at the beginning, and then after that I just didn't notice it, and I hadn't realized 2.25 hours had gone by, because it just flowed and I was absolutely absorbed and just thinking the whole time about it, and just being absolutely challenged and needing to think in a way that you don't often have to do in a film. And so massively appreciated it. It's absorbing. It's a mystery you can dig into and understand. You get a lot out of it from analysing. And it is also just damn cool. It looks gorgeous. It's shot beautifully. The music is amazing. I'm sort of torn. It might be an 11.
Hey,
I don't think I can't say all that, and I was thinking 10 because possibly I wasn't super happy with Andy's death, but I don't think that's worth knocking much more off. So yeah, I am seeing 11s flooding in.
I'd say Andy's death is worth it just for how gruesome it is, because that is one of the few bits of film gore. Oh god, that's one of the few bits of film gore outside of like a dedicated Saw or Hostile type film that really makes me wince and like turn away whenever it's on screen, especially because the camera lingers on it.
Yeah, it's I'm possibly being too poncy here, but it had a sort of It had a sort of like Magritte quality of absurdity, which is also giving you the clue of this is unreality. Like we're getting into absurd territory, but that's possibly going a bit too far.
No, I agree. It's very intentional because it's almost a jump scare because he's knocked out and he jumps back up. The camera cuts to him with a loud sting noise and he goes, ah, and he's got this ridiculous look on his face. And then he just trips and manages to somehow, impale his head on the corner of a glass table. It is absurd and humorous, but disgusting all at the same time.
Mm. Lynch once again is in on the joke. What can we say?
I always assume everything in his film, whether stupid or not, is intentional in some way or another.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that is everything from us. If you were a bit, I mean, we've seen really high scores. I'm seeing 9s, 10, loads of 11s.
Somebody
That's lovely.
questioning my 12. 12 would be the perfect film, which is unimaginable. I'm not measuring it objectively. I'm just measuring it of I absolutely adore this film. It might be my favorite film, so I can't give it anything less than a 12 on that basis.
Oh my gosh. See, this is why it could be a 5-hour stream. There's so much. I didn't even see this.
Yeah, I didn't notice that either. My goodness.
What? I gather the paintings were done by Lynch's ex-wife.
Potentially. I mean, Lynch himself does weird paintings, so they could be his.
Yes. I mean, this is the beauty of it. You could keep delving forever, but sadly, I have Super Nanny to appease. You know, we've been so good, we've been so efficient the last few weeks. So I don't want to wreck it now. You know, we got a reputation to maintain. So I will be leaving it there. So I'll thank you, chat, for keeping it nice and lively. Thank you, waifu, for pitching in while she did, and thank you, Harry, for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much for having me on as well. I've really enjoyed this. And anytime you want to chat Lynch, you know, I'm well up for it. If you do get through that watch through of Twin Peaks and feel like you need somebody to vent to, I'm more than happy to lend a sympathetic ear, because trust me, if you do watch it and get to the ending, you will want to vent.
Okay, very much. Well, maybe I can do that, and I can pull you back in for the human centipede. Who knows?
Oh no!
All right.
Oh,
well,
no, making devil's bargains.
No, I really appreciate it, and you and chat have actually just like given me so much more to think about and understand this film by. I'm a little mind blown as well, and just thinking, right, I need to rewatch.
Yep. It does that to you. It does that to you. Well, I'm glad to have helped, and I'm glad to have been here. I really appreciate the invite. I'm always happy to discuss films like this in absurd levels of detail.
Excellent, excellent. All right, folks. Well, I'll quickly get the December schedule again, but I'll be signing off now so you can see it if you didn't. Oh, where is it? Here we go. Right, here we go. Folks, next week, get yourself along to the cinema for a viewing of Violent Night. It's going to be ridiculous. It's going to be fun. We're having Fox Kimbo on. It's going to be a hoot. And I will leave it there. Thank you all. Thanks. Cheers. I'm tired. All right. Thanks, y'all. Cheers.